Okay, now that we've played with direct and tool adjustments on our creature, and we're happy with how it looks, so this is with direct adjustments, and then this is with tool adjustments. All right, makes a big difference. Remember, you can play with the opacity on each of these layers to adjust it. Now we're going to learn how to play with tool adjustments in a non-destructive way. And we're going to first do this just on everything in the image. So I'm going to go to the very top layer that I have on. And I'm going to make a new layer. I can do that by going either to layer at the top and saying new layer, and then I get to title it, or I can just use the little post-it icon at the bottom of layer window. And in this new blank layer, I'm going to say edit, fill, and I'm going to fill it not with white, not with black, but with 50% gray. So if you're doing this right, it's just going to blank out your entire image with gray. Now I'm going to label this non-destructive. And give it a color. Let's give it a gray color. Now right now it looks pretty destructive because those gray pixels are wiping out everything. All I need to do is change its blending mode from normal to overlay. And it will be like it's not there at all. So what overlay does as a blending mode is it shows anything that's lighter or anything that's darker than 50% gray. But if it's just 50% gray, it's invisible. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dodge and burn on this layer. So if I start with dodge, I'm going to put some highlights in. And this way I can do highlights across not just the creature, but also the environment. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, my brush. Keep its hardness nice and soft. And I'm going to only do the midtones at an exposure of less than 30. And let's try a little bit more brightness in the background here. Just a little bit. To kind of showcase my creature. And maybe just a little bit more off to the side there. Maybe a little bit in the middle ground. And notice that I am not affecting my pixels at all in my individual layers. Instead, I am simply changing my non-destructive gray layer. And because it's on overlay, it shows me everything as it looks like it's affecting what's underneath. So this is a very safe, easy way to do a non-destructive editing layer. Not having to use a clipping mask, not having to use different blending modes or adjustment layers, just being very direct. Now I can do the same thing with burn. Keep it nice and big, nice and soft. And this time I want to maybe take down some of the midtones on these foreground elements. And especially, I want to put a shadow underneath my creature. So let me show you what that looks like. If I just turn my non-destructive layer, it looks like that. The problem is, for mine, there's a big mushroom in front of it. So this is what's kind of cool about this non-destructive layer. If I set it to overlay, I can still erase away from it. So I'm going to use a nice soft eraser. I'm going to use it at a middling opacity, around 50%. Make it a little bit bigger. And what I'm erasing from is this non-destructive layer to let that mushroom make a little bit more sense. But you still see the shadow underneath my creature. I can erase away from it in the foreground here. Like so. Now, what if I wanted to adjust the levels and the saturation of this foreground, maybe to highlight my creature a little bit more? Then I want to go down to my actual foreground layer and then do direct adjustments to that. So I can start with levels. Remember, you can always push things in two ways. And I can darken or brighten. I think I actually want to brighten the midtones a little bit, limit the highlights. Maybe limit the shadows just a tiny bit. There we go. And I'm not doing this as a duplicate. I'm just doing it because I think it's helping. But I can always go back in my history and see if that helped. I think that does. And now I'm going to go right to, well, I can do color balance. I should do all the right steps. So I think hue saturation is really what I need. I'm just going to push it a little bit more towards the blues so that the warmth of my creature stands out a little bit more. And especially in the highlights, I'm going to take down a little bit of that yellow. And now the big guns for my foreground hue saturation, I'm just going to take the whole saturation slider down a little bit. Because where before that was really one of the focal points, now, we'll see before. Now the creature becomes more dominant in the frame. Now there might be little places like here where some of that old saturation remains, and I just have to see that that's part of this tree layer where I just copied the tree, so then I'm going to erase it away from there at a full opacity. And it just becomes, again, about knowing your layers and organizing them appropriately. All right, so all of that looks pretty good. I'm going to save that. And if I turn on my overlay layer, this is what you see. If I make it just normal mode, you see my shadows, but my cast shadow is only underneath my creature. I erased it away from these things that were overlapping it. You can erase away from it, but just keep it on overlay, and it will make a big difference. So that's without it, and that's with it, my non-destructive overlay layer. And you can always play with the opacity of it, just like if it was for dodging and burning itself. So maybe I'll take it to 85%. More like 90. All right. So once I've saved that, now I get to show you a really fun trick, and that's adding atmosphere. Because if you look at some of the examples given with the assignment, a lot of production concept art, where you're actually putting the creature into an environment, has to do not just with the creature design and the lighting, it has to do with the sense of atmosphere, with the heaviness of the air. And sometimes like blurring effects and focus effects, and not everything needs to be super sharp. So we're going to learn this trick called the texture fill. And if you just do a Google search for texture fill, this is a design term. It's basically textures to put over the top of images. They can be used for lots of different things, and it's used to make something feel more believable, right? So this says you can use things as water, minerals, clouds. You can change the colors of a texture fill. If you're familiar with painting, it's like glazing a painting. You finished a painting, everything's great, but you want it to all be kind of merged together to look a little bit more consistent. So you might glaze the whole thing with like a thin layer of transparent yellow. So texture fills, obviously, a lot of them are just for kind of textures of paper. What we want is something for a concept environment. So we're going to look for cloudy or misty texture fills. And what this does is give us a really, really easy base to build atmosphere. If you like the color of it, so for instance, if you're doing kind of a desert scene and you want a sandstorm kind of effect, like maybe you want a warmer cloud. If you're doing something more stormy and at sea, you might want kind of the more bluer, more contrasted texture fills. But these cloudy texture fills can kind of do everything for us. This one's incredibly dramatic, right? Now, all those best practices still apply when we are using someone else's pixels, but the good news about texture fills is when you use them as a texture fill, they're not at all recognizable because we're going to be using them at such low opacities. So what I do, I'm not even going to save this to my folder. I'm just going to drag and drop it onto my image at the very top. And then I'm going to stretch it with Command T, because texture fills don't even need to be high resolution because we're using them and softening them as we go. And as we enlarge, they automatically soften. So I stretch that kind of cloudy texture over my whole image. I can also, of course, hold down Shift and push and pull it in different ways, right? To get different shaped clouds. And to get kind of the drama I want. So that's kind of the quality of the air I want for my swampy forest. Now, how do I actually integrate this? Well, the most basic way is to just take opacity and take it way down. So it's amazing. The fog has now come in, the mist. But it's kind of even everywhere. And I don't want it to be as even everywhere. I might try a blending mode. Soft light is a nice choice for texture fills often with atmosphere. And you'll see it just gives a little bit of wispiness through your image in some places more than others. And it's kind of like doing this cloudy glaze, which lets a little bit more air exist at the front and at the back, but my creature is in this little pocket where you can see it a little bit more clearly. Or I could try pin light, which will be a little bit more direct. And you see that mist building up where it's brightest, right over the image. And because it's cloudy, all the edges are soft. You're not going to see hard edges. Okay, so I'm going to do a combination. I'm going to do a pin light texture fill of this cloud at, let's say, 25%. Then I'm going to duplicate it and change it to a soft light and keep that at 25% because they all kind of layer on top of each other. And now, if I want specific kind of atmospheric effects, like if I want my creature to be breathing some of this stuff, I'm going to take a chunk of it, just with my lasso, chunk of cloud, duplicate it with Command J, make that 100% on normal mode, just so I can see it. There it is. Then I'm going to use my eraser at 100% opacity with a 0% soft edge. And I'm going to take all the hard edges away from my lasso selection. Right, something like that. Give it a kind of organic shape. And now I can move it up around my creature's mouth. I can transform it and warp it. Something like that. And then I can just take that little segment, that little cloud, and blend it in, with soft light, with pin light. Pin light's a little extreme, right? So then I can use my eraser at lower opacities and start showing my creature